Hello and welcome to another episode of Teaching Heroes, the teaching podcast where I ask teachers and educators, what does it take to turn up every day and teach tomorrow's leaders? And today we have an extraordinary guest on our podcast. We have Karen Young, who is the owner of Hey Sigmund and a neurodevelopmental psychologist. Karen, thank you so much for coming on my podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm a neurodevelopment educator. I used to be a psychologist, and now I'm in this area, which I love because I feel like this is where the work is.
100%. Definitely. Yeah. And I really appreciate your time and expertise. So Karen, tell us a little bit, for those very few people I would imagine who don't know who you are, tell us about who you are and tell us about your business.
Yeah. So I started as a psychologist, working with kids and teens and families, and I ventured now, and then I built the website because I thought we just need to get this information into the hands of as many people as we can. So I was seeing kids for 45 minutes a week, but the real work happened, and that's important, and kids and families absolutely can benefit from that support. But I used to think the work's outside, the work is happening outside, and we need to get that information into the hands of the important adults who are with kids during every day of their lives. And so that's the parents, the teachers, the grandparents, the carers, everybody. And so then I built the website, and it quickly moved into focusing on anxiety. That's just where the need was. And every time I did something in relation to that, that was where I got the response. And that just really, for me, spoke to how much of a need there is for this information. And I suppose how many kids are needing the support and the strengthening.
Yeah, and is anxiety, can I ask, it's obviously a rising issue, or it's an issue that we identify with more and more. Is it just that we know now the label, do you think, or is it something that so something that's always been ongoing and now we have, a kind of broad diagnosis we can give it, or is it something new to modern life?
I think we have to remember is anxiety is a really normal we'd be dead if we didn't have the capacity for anxiety. We would be dead. So it's a really normal human experience, but it's on a spectrum from everyday levels, and that fight or flight we go into when there's a threat, that has to happen. If we didn't have that, we'd be stepping headfirst into trouble too much. But then there's the point where we get anxiety, but it's in response to things that don't need that response, and that's where it's getting in the way. So anxiety's always been there. It's always been there, and intrusive anxiety has always been there, because it's a part of who we are. It's the reason we've survived as a collective for as long as we have. But I think there are certainly things now that mean we're seeing more of it. So there's more structure, there's less play, there's more pressure on kids. If we look at teens, they're exposed, they're daily with how they should be, how they should look, who they should be, much more than any other generation that's come before them. And we know that comparison can certainly lead to anxiety. So I think our lifestyles, there's less sleep, kids are busier, less movement, all of those things contribute to anxiety, but for sure it's always been in us. But I think there are certain lifestyle factors that maybe
make it into a condition rather than a necessary part of our
make it
survival.
bigger.
Make it bigger than what it is. And is it, so I get that it is a part of what makes us human, but is the over response, so that, as you said, makes it bigger, is that a genetic thing or is that environment? I mean, you pointed to a lot of environmental factors there as well. However, is there something genetically or microbiology? I don't really know the science terms, so I'm just saying, like, is there something in your makeup or in somebody's individual brain makeup that would make anxiety more likely to be prevalent within them?
It does seem to have a genetic basis to it, but that doesn't mean, but genes aren't destiny. So experiences are much more important in this sense than genes, and environment is much more important than our genetics. So a child might be born with a genetic vulnerability or a genetic propensity to tilt towards anxiety, but that doesn't mean that they're going to get intrusive levels of anxiety. At the same time, a child might have not a huge genetic tendency towards anxiety, but then have intrusive levels of anxiety. So we don't talk about one or the other so much. It's more we can nurture the nature. So even if there is something there, we can work with that. But I think environment is really important, and the experiences that kids have is really important as well.
Yeah, because I wonder, in my own experiences, have personally had an experience with anxiety. My children have you know, intrusive levels of anxiety too. And the more I dealt with and was able to manage my own anxiety so that it isn't no longer an issue for me, I saw that my sons then as well were able to manage their anxiety better. And I wonder, is it because I knew how and I could then pass on those techniques, or was it, you know, they just no longer had an anxious mother anymore, and so maybe their levels of anxiety kind of dropped as well?
Well, it's both. So I think it's really important also to say parents don't cause anxiety. So we have to really be careful with that narrative. And there's a big one out there.
Yeah.
And it's just not true. So there isn't any evidence that says parents cause anxiety. But as any parent, there are things that we can all do. I've done them all, that can make it worse. So having, if kids feel like we're anxious, we can catch anxiety. We catch anxiety, they can catch our calm.
Yes.
So it really does go both ways. In the same way we catch their anxiety and we catch their calm too.
Yeah, it is that. I mean, I know in my own experience it you know, can be a bit like that. And I know when I can be calm when they're anxious, we both tend to get through it a lot quicker than what we you know, when their episode kind of like comes up. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And would that be the same for the teachers then in the classroom, in terms of if they're anxious, then their classrooms? But, you know, I really respect what you're saying. It's not that the teachers or the parents are causing anxious children in their classrooms, but there's a level of their who they are being in the classroom that might, you know, lead the classroom to go into one way or another.
So there's two things in that.
Yeah.
The first is our nervous systems talk to each other every minute of every day.
Yeah.
So even if you are with someone else in a room, our nervous systems are picking up cues, and it's often through nonverbals. So, and teachers are human. But if you start a day and you're quite stressed, which is going to happen because none of us have smooth days every day of the year.
Yeah.
That's going to happen.
Yeah.
And by the end of the day, your class is a bit wired, it's possible that they're feeding from you. In the same way, if you start the day calm and for whatever reason your class is a bit activated, you're going to catch that as well. And by the end of the day, you're going to be. So we feed into the cycle. But the big thing I want to say about anxiety in the classroom is the relationship between the teacher and a child is fundamental. We can't get away from that. So one of the things that the most powerful way to calm anxiety in any child is through that relational safety, because we're wired to feel safest when we're with our important people, or when there is an adult who we feel connected to, but also who has that leadership presence. So it's not enough to have that leadership presence in the classroom. There also has to be a warmth there as well, and that connectedness and attachment as well. Not all all kids benefit from it, but some kids will need it more than other kids, and the kids who are really anxious, they really need that relationship.
Yeah. So from a neurodevelopmental point of view then, what is it about the warmth there that you're pointing to, the relationship between the adult carer in the classroom and the child? I guess what I'm asking really is that shift that we've had in psychology and in neurology, that we kind of understand now how important that relationship is. So what is it from a developmental point of view that is so essential that we as teachers really ensure that that relationship is solid?
Yeah, so that relational safety calms the emotional centers of the brain.
Okay.
So all emotion and anxiety I include anxiety, is actually a call for support. So in any child or in any adolescent, it's actually a call for us to come closer. It's how the brain recruits support.
Yeah.
So we're wired for that. Now, if you're the person standing in front of a young person who's feeling big anxiety, you're the support who's being recruited. Now, what we need to do, so the amygdala is the part of the brain, which is the seat of anxiety. That part of the brain is looking for support. So what we do with that relationship is it's like speaking directly to the amygdala, which is driving the body into an anxious state. We're saying support's here. It's okay. You can step down now. You've done your job. You've got support.
Okay.
And that will calm the nervous system. So, and it won't happen just because it's the adult in the room. So it has to be a working relationship. I hear about a lot of classrooms who just put someone in, an extra person in. So a teacher's aide or someone to help, an extra adult in the room. That's not going to work unless for kids with anxiety, unless there is a working relationship there. So the number of adults won't matter. It's the quality of the relationships that matter, and it will calm that nervous system.
Yeah, I think you're pointing to something so essential. And I know, particularly my youngest child, who is just very resistant to any adult relationship unless he is 100% confident that that adult is there for him. Even took a while for, my sister and my mum, who see him quite a lot, for him to be able to just go up and spontaneously hug them. It took a really long, till he was 5 or 6 before he even, did that, because of that. And his teachers were just so beautiful with him, but it took a long time. And their, loving persistence in that relation, in trying to establish that relationship with him, won over in the end. And now he's a child that loves school, whereas, beginning of kindergarten, he just didn't want anything to do with it. And I'm, pretty sure that was because it took that time for him to establish that relationship with his teacher.
We weren't meant to feel safe with every adult. We don't feel safe with every adult.
Exactly, yeah.
Then we don't want them to feel safe with every adult. So it's a protective thing as well. And some kids will just take longer. And what we have to do is not pathologize that.
Yes.
And not rush it and not force it. It'll happen in their time, and we can't rush it. So we have to respond really respectfully to this and do the work it takes to build a relationship with a child.
Yeah. And even I often say to my students, they say to me, what's the best behaviour management strategy you have? And I said, there's only one thing you need to do, and that is love them. And they laugh at me, and I go, no, I'm serious. That's it. That is it. You concentrate on being love in the classroom, and all else will come into play. There's no magic hand clap or anything that can, or, dojo sticker that can replace just like loving the children in your classroom.
And it's actually, we have no choice. There's no choice on this. It's just how it has to be, because an anxious brain,
you can't manipulate the human brain.
No, and an anxious brain can't learn. So you can be the best teacher in the world. You can be the most brilliant teacher. If that child does not feel safe and calm with you, and if that child doesn't trust that you actually care about them, then they're not going to learn anything.
Yeah. And do you think then, that the pressure that schools and teachers are under to kind of produce these academic results, even in a kind of kindergarten classroom, impacts then on their ability to be able to establish that quality relationship with them?
Absolutely, it does. And what I've heard is the time that it is taking now on administration in the classroom, and just to actually, my dad was a teacher. He's just recently retired.
Yeah, right.
And he said the change he's seen over his career, where a long time ago, or, at the start of his career, they could invest the time in these relationships because there was time, but there's so much paperwork that's needed now to get through and the curriculum is full. That is stressful for teachers. My stepdaughter's a teacher, my son's girlfriend is a teacher, and they're brilliant humans, and I think, you know, if anyone can connect to these young kids, they can, and I know they will. But then there's also this layer of the extra work that they have to do. The thing I say is the resources are there. So kids are not looking for what you do, they're looking for who you are. Once you get that relationship right, the rest of it will take care of itself. Behavior will take care of itself. Learning will take care of itself. And of course, you know, that means we've still got to do what we need to do. But it will be much easier. The way through is easier. But what I see is there's so much and I just have the greatest respect for teachers because there is so much that they have to do. Yet, and teachers probably didn't sign up to be surrogate parents or counsellors or psychologists, but yet relationship is the most important part of the job, because if you want to access that learning brain, that brain has to feel safe and calm and relaxed. And it's going to do that through relationship first. So it is your greatest tool to get through. And I know even my own children, they're big now, they're 18 and 23, but the subjects they would make big improvements and they'd do well in the subjects where they had that connection with the teacher. It's everything. But there is so much more now that teachers have to do that add in, and it is a big focus on academics. And what really bothers me is how this is starting from a much younger age. So because what we want to do is from a really young age build that love of learning, but also that idea in them that they're great learners. And that will happen through they love coming to school, they love seeing their teacher, they connect with their teacher, and it's all fun. And I know the teachers do that. You know, there are some and we can all remember the teacher who made the difference and took the time, even, you know, decades later. But I also am really aware that there are things getting in the way that are taking priority that probably shouldn't. Question that. I think I worry that the priorities are shifting in a way that's not necessarily good in terms of supporting that capacity to learn, at least in the really early years. And there's time for that. Of course, there has to come a time where they need to learn. But what we want to do is build that association between school and feeling safe and secure, and a place where I feel big and good at what I do. And that's going to come through relationships. So the most important job of those early teachers is relationship.
And I wonder, just while you were talking, I was thinking about the recruiting of teachers, because one of the things that always happens in October, in New South Wales anyway, is all this talk around the ATAR level of teachers, you know, and how, you're only asking for 60 or whatever, you know, all the universities have a different rank, but we tend to kind of all follow the same, really. You're not getting the best. You know, it's like you're not getting the best people or something if they're not this high level. And I just wonder, well, what are we saying then about what makes a good teacher if we're just focusing on that mark in an exam that was written in a cold hall, you know, when you're only 17, suddenly, you know, that just marks you for whether you're good at relationships or not. That just doesn't make any sense from what you're saying.
It doesn't. Well, I worry that we're missing a lot of good people who have been really great teachers. And if you look at the age that we're choosing, so 17, they're still developing their brain. You know, the brain is still in big development right through until early to late 20s. So we don't even know what 17-year-olds are capable of yet. They don't even know, especially because they've been through a school system which might not have brought out the best in them yet, because we don't know what the best is. But that doesn't mean that they won't be magnificent teachers, because they're able to get to kids, they're able to reach kids. And I think that relational thing, that's something it's hard to teach, you know, it has to be in there. So it's but I mean, I think it's like that really for any career, because we're asking kids to choose so young, after they've come through the education system, which really suits some kids and it doesn't necessarily suit other kids. You know, it doesn't necessarily bring out what they're capable of because they're still developing.
Yeah, and I think, as you say, I mean, I really noticed that when because I try and go back into classrooms every now and again to, you know, work my muscle, and, you know, just really notice the kids that are ready to do a certain type of work and kids that aren't. You know, kids that are just still playing but we're kind of force is the wrong word, but, you know, strongly encouraging them to be in an environment that is just not suitable to the way they're learning. And like, you know, and I talk to some parents and I go, look, just give them time. Like this person will blossom. I'm sure of it. And just be patient with them and who they are and they're becoming, and look at their strengths beyond their ability to write, you know, write a poem at this stage. You know, it's all going to come.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have to recognize that, and kids will learn in different ways at different times. But those young years, and I've worked with too many kids who have got this idea of themselves as stupid, not my word, as stupid, or not very good at school or not very smart, because in those early years, they weren't ready. But they have so much potential. It's all there. But by grade 3, they've already marked themselves as smart or not smart.
Yeah.
And that really worries me, because that mindset, once they get it, is really hard to shift. And that's going to affect them more than anything. If they've already got this idea of themselves, they're less likely to persist at hard things. They're less likely to approach challenge. When something goes wrong, they're more likely to give up and, you know, tools down, because that will be taken as proof that I'm not smart, rather than I know there's a way through this, I just haven't found it yet. And that's what really bothers me about such a focus on academics and streaming kids so young. You know, we don't even know what they're capable of. And we know boys, you know, boys and girls even at the very base level develop at different rates. And even within boys and within girls, they develop at different rates. Yet, so yeah, I worry about what that's doing.
Yeah, streaming, particularly in primary schools, I teased a principal friend of mine. I said, you realise what you're just streaming is compliance. You know, the kids in your top classes are the ones that can sit still. I mean, that's what you're giving A's to, you know. You know, he kind of got what I was saying, because there is a sense of, you know, and I think I wonder about parental education sometimes in terms of schooling, because we have had such a shift in our understanding of the brain. And so those of us that work in education, or, you know, a psychologist, you know, in your training, which is vastly superior to mine, but you get that there's been a shift to what it was like when we were at school, but parents don't know that, and so they get really worried and upset that their child isn't being taught the same way they are, and they feel like they're missing out. And I just wonder whether there needs to be more education of parents about these changes in education, and sometimes maybe education ministers as well, to kind of understand where we really need to go in teacher training and what we really need to do in the classroom.
I think one of the things I see from parents when I talk to parents is I see a lot of concern, and this is when I'm working with parents whose kids are feeling anxiety. What I see is a lot of concern that, you know, my child doesn't feel settled at school, or they feel a lot of things where the relationship comes in. So, and they might say the teacher, what I hear a lot is, great teacher, really trying with my child, but this teacher has 25 other kids too that they have to respond to. So it's really hard focusing on my child. So I think a lot of parents understand how hard it is, And that's where, you know, that relationship, yeah, we want it with the teacher in the room, but it doesn't have to be, you know, any adult can do it. So I see what I see from parents is that longing for that relational safety. They want it because they know what works for their kids. They see it. And they, you know, these parents who have to peel kids off them to hand them over to a teacher, or kids who really don't want to go to camp, or the getting ready routine can go on for 2 or 3 hours in the morning because these kids just don't want to go to school. And the difference that can happen when there is one adult who takes that child lovingly, and it's still not easy. It's not easy. Because that doesn't mean that child is going to go easily. But what I see is parents, from where I'm, you know, where I come from, I see more parents going, if they get the relationship, if you know, I'm not so worried about what they're learning. I know they can do it, but just right now, I just want them to have that confidence at school and to be able to go to school without any worries at all. So I kind of see parents who are really giving priority to, I just want my kid to like going to school and to be happy there. The learning, I don't even care about, because well, of course they care, but there's that element of I just want them to go to school first, and then the learning will happen. But if I can't even get them to school, or if I can't even get them to camp, or if I can't even get them into these activities, learning's kind of, you know, down the track. So that's what I see with parents.
And I personally relate to that. And know that when my kids have liked their teacher, I mean, even as young, you know, I mean, it's obvious in daycare, but I've had experiences both in daycares and at school where it's the beauty of taking your child to school to an adult that you know loves them and that they love them is just out of this world amazing.
It really is. And it makes, and as a parent, it's everything. But it takes time, because you can be the most loving, most nurturing teacher. It's going to take time for that child to feel it. And it's really hard for teachers. I feel for them, because I see these teachers who would just do anything, you know, to connect with some of these kids. But it takes time, and it's hard when there's so much else going on. But I suppose, you know, from where I'm coming from, it's worth the investment, whatever investment you can make in that relationship, because once you have that attachment, that child will give you that authority to lead them and teach them, and it will let you do your job.
Do you think it's possible for any type of teacher to have a relationship with any type of student, or is there sometimes that you're just going to write off the year? Sometimes I felt like, well, I just think this year isn't going to be my kid's year, you know.
What I think is, not every teacher will like every child, because not every adult likes every adult.
No.
And okay, what I say is, that's okay. You don't have to love my child, but what you do have to do is make sure my child doesn't feel that. So I think it's certainly possible for not every teacher to click inside with every child. But I think it's really important that at least that child, as much as they can, senses that that teacher really cares. And if there's an issue there, there's some work that needs to be done. Either, you know, what's going on for you that this child is pushing you so much, or has this just been such a big year with this child? You've just exhausted and you're done. And I want to respect that as well. So I think, you know, there's also that part of this where we look at, well, how do we also nurture our teachers? How do we also make sure our teachers are getting what they need? Because I know that sometimes this work can be really exhausting. But it is really important that kids don't get a sense that a teacher doesn't like them, even if the teacher doesn't. And, you know, that's not for anyone to judge that. But but there's work that needs to happen there.
Yeah. One of the things I say to my students is to consider at the end of each day, whose story haven't you heard today?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because that will give you an indication about who you're missing. And I think particularly for those students who are quiet, who are compliant, who you think are going okay, they're doing their work, but you might not have actually heard anything from them about themselves. So they might have responded to a question you've asked academically, but you don't actually know who this person is. And I think that can raise not alarm bells, maybe that's too strong, but a kind of query about, well, how right is this child? Like, are they really okay?
Yeah. And there are kids who that's one of the things anxiety does, is it makes us smaller. That's one of the ways it protects us. And kids will fly right under the radar. And the thing is, they will do enough to get by.
Yeah.
But we won't be seeing their best, and they won't be seeing their best.
Yes.
And we don't need to get their best out of them all the time.
Yeah.
But we want to at least expose them to the best that they're capable of, or that belief that they're capable of big things and doing hard things and facing challenge and, thinking about things differently. That's where we want to get to. One of the things I say for teachers who, and I love what you said just then, whose story you haven't heard. But one of the things I say, if there is a child who is really pressing your buttons, there is a part of their story that would make it make sense. We don't know what it is.
Right. That's
so there's part of their world, their relationships, their history that would make their behaviour make sense. And that's one of the things that we need to keep seeking. It doesn't necessarily make their behaviour okay, but it makes it make sense. And I think these kids who throw really big behaviour, they don't do it because they want to do it. They don't do it just to play up, and it might look like they're doing it for control or manipulation or whatever it is. But then I say, so what is it about their world right now that makes that need for control or to be able to get something from you really important right now? And that need will really be valid. So there's a valid need behind every behaviour. Sometimes we see the behaviour without actually looking behind it. And that's because when a child is in big behaviour, we go into fight or flight as well, because we catch it. So, we need to be kind to ourselves as well, but also try and understand the bit of this, or find the bit of the story that we're missing that would make it make sense.
Yeah. And older children as well, teens, is I wonder about the friendship network too, and how we as adults can better encourage positive friendships, because I think we sometimes leave friendships. I'm not sure. I don't know. My kids aren't teenagers yet, so wait and see. But I wonder about that. How much can you ensure that your child is in a healthy friendship? Because those peer networks are so important when they're teenagers, particularly for things like anxiety and depression. And there's, the adult, of course, is important, but that peer network is just essential to a healthy child and mindset.
It is essential. Adolescents still need to feel that connection with an adult.
Okay.
So they still need to feel that that attachment with an adult. So we need to be really careful not to believe the things we hear about how adolescents, don't like adults and they don't want to be. I've never met an adolescent who doesn't want to be connected to their important adult, whether it's a parent or a teacher. They don't want to be controlled and they don't want to be patronised.
Yeah.
And I think that's sometimes where we can get it wrong, because I can smell that a mile away.
Yeah.
And we lose them.
Yeah.
But if we can, once you get into the world of an adolescent, that's how we start to have influence. And if we want to start influencing those peer groups, and either influencing them towards people or maybe steering around people. If the combination of that child and that group isn't working, we need influence, because otherwise we've got nothing. They're not going to listen to us. We're just a nobody. They'll pretend to listen, but they won't be. And so to do that, we actually need that relationship. What that attachment is once kids have attachment, they grant permission to lead, guide and teach to whoever they're attached to. Now, if adolescents don't have it with an important adult, they're going to attach to peers, and that's okay. We want that, but they will grant authority to lead, guide and teach to their peers. Now, the problem with that is we've got peers leading peers. We want them to be influenced by peers as long as there's an adult up the top who's also able to have some influence, because we can see around the corners that they can't quite see it. But if there is no adult there at the top that they feel attached to, all of that authority is going to their peers. And that's why we see peers leading peers. And sometimes it'll be fine and sometimes it will be terrible. So that's why ultimately we want to make that, we want that connection with adolescents as well. And in my experience, once you're attached to them, they give you everything. They're just so, it's big, they're so open to you. But we have to work for it in the same way we have to work with anxious young kids. You have to work with it with adolescents as well.
I think one of the mistakes I made as a young teacher was, I started teaching when I was 25, was that this assumption that, and I was teaching in high school at the time, the assumption that the students would grant me that, what you were saying about the lead, guide and teach, because I was the teacher, the assumption that because I was in that role, I deserved that respect, or I was, should be granted that respect. And I realized, many years later, that what I did not have with those students was relationship, like I did with some classes and not with others. And as a young teacher, I put the blame firmly with them. But in retrospect, I wasn't making the effort to kind of get to know who they were and where they were at, which was really important for them to try, particularly when I was teaching drama at the time, particularly with something like drama, which really does rely on that, core relationship between the student and the teacher.
Absolutely. And they're no different to us. So we are less likely to give the best of ourselves to someone who we think isn't necessarily invested in us or in what we have to give. But if it's with someone who we feel like is invested in us, who we trust, who cares about us, then we give it. So they're no different to us. And it's true. Kids will respect you because that's what they have to do. But it's kind of it's a head thing. What you want it to be is a heart thing. And when you have it as a heart thing, then they really will be guided by you. They'll be willing to be guided by you. When it's a head thing, they'll do the right thing and they'll do what they need to do to stay out of trouble. But we're not necessarily going to have the authority that we need to be able to guide them into challenge or into difficult things, which is what we want to do. That's what this is about. Or to really give that little bit extra, to really give the best of themselves. And it all comes back to relationship.
One of the things you said earlier was that need for us to support our teachers. And I'll be honest, I've been thinking about that in the background while the whole time you were talking, very interested in what you're saying, and also thinking, gosh, we really do, what can we do? And it's almost the same thing, right? Almost all those things around our young teachers needing to have colleagues within the school or mentors within the school who they are also able to feel that they can learn, they can be inspired, they can have relationships with, in order to then put that into the classroom.
Absolutely, we do. But we also need to teach about how behaviour happens and what causes big behaviour and why some kids are hard to reach and what do you have to do to reach those kids and why relationship and learning are so connected. They're inseparable. Because I think what can happen is with teachers, you can have the best teaching methods and the best model, but then there'll be kids who throw big behaviour in a classroom. Easy to take that personally. Or there'll be kids who might not necessarily, they're capable of more, but you're not seeing it. It's easy to take that personally. Whereas what we want to do, I think what there needs to be more of is more education around how learning happens, how behaviour happens, why some kids will be harder to reach and why we'll need to do more and how to do that. And that will, and this is where I come back to, teachers didn't necessarily sign up to be, relationship people or surrogate parents or surrogate aunts or uncles. Yet it's the first place we have to go to. It's going to feed into classroom behaviour. It's going to feed into learning. It's going to feed into the academics that we get at the end of it. It feeds into everything. And I think understanding that, it will let teachers be kinder to themselves and more patient with themselves, because it's hard. We ask for these results academically, but that's so contingent on other things. And it's easy to look at the results column and go, well, these kids aren't getting the results they need. Yet maybe what you've done this year is made it really is you've built this child's idea of themselves as a nothing or as not very smart into, maybe I can do this, maybe I can approach it. And then next year is when you'll start to see results. So the most important things that teachers do can't always be assessed by grades, because those early years especially, they're building the foundations for learning that are going to come later on, but it's not visible. You're not going to see it. You're not going to see how that relationship builds the idea of these kids up. You're not going to see that if you're the one adult in their lives. And for some of these kids, their teacher will be the one adult in their lives who actually loves them and makes them feel cared for. You'll never know the difference that makes.
I know, and there's always those corny stories, but they're so true. When the astrophysicist or whatever comes back to their year 3 teacher who made all the difference, and there's so many of those stories because it's true. And I wonder, do we call them the wrong thing? Is teachers the wrong name? And is that harking back to kind of the model of when, education first started because we wanted people to learn how to read and write so that they could then, create, this new humanity that we had started to create in the industrial era, etc. But now what we are more aware of is that schools are kind of creating the kind of human beings that we want in the world. And therefore they need all these, a teacher is not just someone who's teaching the ABCs and the 1, 2, 3s, but rather kind of encouraging this love of learning, this leaders of learning that we talk about is really what a teacher is. And perhaps the ones that stay in the profession are the ones that kind of have a mastery over that. And the ones that leave just cannot, see their way through in creating those relationships with really difficult humans.
Really difficult and really complex. And one of the things we need to remember is that learning brain really depends on a solid on a really solid neural foundation and really solid neural networks, which are building really in those early years up to 6, 7, 8, and then the learning brain comes on. But what we need to do is get those foundations right. So especially in those early years, that's the work. That's where the work is. We talk about where the world of the influencer, and that's where all the power is now. There is no greater influencer than a teacher.
Yeah.
But if you look at if you look at, you know, on the model, how it's done, the first way we influence people is by connecting with them, and by that's when we get their heart, we get their mind, we get their eyes, we get their ears, we get it all. But first it happens through that relationship, then the learning comes. So it's not just about teaching. For teachers, that's that I'm giving you information, but there's a whole cycle that's happening there. I'm feeding into your neurophysiology, you're feeding into mine, I'm feeding into yours, and it's a whole cycle. And what happens at the end of it in terms of learning really depends on that cycle. Am I helping you feel safe? Are you am I getting triggered by you? Is that feeding back into you? Or am I able to give you what you need and help you feel safe? And can you then feed off my calm, and I can feed you? And then we'll settle that brain, and now you can learn. Now you're ready for learning. There's a whole process that has to come before learning can happen.
Yeah. And can that happen at any time? Because there's more of an understanding of the neuroplasticity of the brain, right? Correct me if I'm wrong, but that while those early foundations are really important, if for whatever reason that those needs weren't being able to be met, those needs can be still met at another time, right? Even though it might take longer. Yeah,
they can be, absolutely. So the younger the younger a child is, when they don't have what they need in terms of their neurodevelopment, the bigger the impact and the harder it is to put it back. We can, but it's going to take longer. But what I will say is, if a child has missed out on those vital experiences they need for that neurodevelopment to happen as it needs to, we have no choice but at least to try and put it back. And it all comes with that attachment relationship. So, and that's why some kids will be harder to reach, and that's why some kids will throw big behavior daily, sometimes big behavior. Possibly they're the kids who haven't got what they needed right from the start, that we all need, that if any of us missed out on, we would all be behaving exactly the same way. So it's just another thing that can help us look at these kids through more of a compassionate lens and a service lens. What do you need from me? What can I do for you? Rather than that pathological, or not pathological, but rather than through a lens of pathology, what's wrong with you? Why aren't you like the other kids? Why are you so hard to reach? And that's the bit of their story sometimes that we need to make it make sense, because if we went through some of the experiences that some of these kids go through, we'd be doing exactly the same thing. So we can put it back. We can get these kids back, but it will take time, and sometimes a long time, especially if they've missed out on learning that relationships can be loving and kind, and that adults are there for them, and someone's coming. They've never had the opportunity to learn that. Well, we're just another adult, and who says that we care about them? It's going to take them a long time to learn that they can feel safe in our care. But we have no choice. We have to take the time that it takes to build that. And sometimes teachers can go through a whole year, a whole school year, and not see change. But if they've been working on that relationship, just because you don't see change on the outside doesn't mean it's not happening on the inside. And
just a last question for you, Karen. Thinking about over the last year in Australia and around the world, but let's talk about Australia in terms of COVID. There have been, times, and more, Victoria suffered it more than the rest of the states, and Sydney's suffering of it right now. But teachers are now gone online, and for whatever reason, there aren't really any kind of live Zoom lessons happening. A lot of the learning is happening through, Google Slides and students doing their own work, alongside their parents. So there are, these lacks of time with relationship with their teachers. I guess I wonder about the impact, or are there things we can do as parents, or it just really occurred to me in the last bit of what you were saying was like, wow, we're missing this time with the teachers, are missing this time with students in, being able to maintain and establish these really important relationships. And I know my son's teacher last year said, oh, I missed the class so much. And I said, you were only online for about a month, like in Sydney last year. It wasn't actually that long, but for her, it just had this huge impact on her ability to have the relationship with the class.
Yeah, no, I get it. Teachers, I can't gush about them enough, because first of all, to have to do it in a classroom and then to be thrown into online is just wow.
Yeah.
It's interesting, I've seen different things happen. So for some kids who have been really anxious about school, they've actually thrived. And I've also heard from some parents and kids and teachers that for the kids who have been really anxious, it's actually been an opportunity for them to build a relationship with their teacher, because they've been able to do it gently and slowly, because it's online. So it's safe. Yes. There's that sense of I don't know, there's just that sense that they're at arm's length enough. But the relationship, it doesn't need to be long interactions for the relationship to build. So one of the things I say is 2 minutes every day about that kid for 10 days. Try that. And that's a way to start to build it. So we don't need to have these long conversations, but just showing this child that for 2 minutes today, I'm just here with you, and I'm really interested in you, and I'm with you and behind you. That can make a really big difference to building relationship, as it would. Think of it with us. If there are a whole bunch of adults in the room, and there was one of those adults who kept taking 2 minutes to come and make sure we were okay, that would matter. That matters. And kids feel it too. So what I have heard is that some kids have actually been able to build, because it's been a safer way to do it. For some kids, they've really struggled because they haven't had that contact with the teacher. One of the things for parents that's really important is that parents communicate their belief in the teacher and their trust in the teacher to their kids. And also anywhere that parents can communicate, that teachers can communicate to parents that they really like their child, and for that to go back to a child is really powerful as well. So if a teacher was to send an email to a parent, so if this is happening online, and said, your child answered this question really well today. I was really proud of them. Just wanted to let you know. And then if that parent tells the child, oh, your teacher told me what you did today, I was so proud of you, that just bigs that child up a little bit more. And for that child to know that two important adults are talking good things about us, talking, and it's all good about them, that also adds to relationship and safety. So even though it's not directly with the child, indirectly between the teacher and the parent, we can also work on that relationship with the child.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you so much, Karen. I could talk to you forever. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope to see you in person for one of your amazing sessions. Have a look at Karen. She offers face-to-face sessions for teachers and educators, and I'm definitely coming to one as soon as you are in Sydney. And check, I didn't even ask you about your book. He's got a more. I was going to ask you about your picture books as well next time.
That's
Karen has amazing picture books. Hey Awesome and Hey Warrior, go check them out for young people who experience anxiety. It's been amazing. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me. Thank you. See you.
Right. And I'll see you all next week for another episode of Teaching Heroes. Bye.
Perfect.